Brew Strong is brought to you by Blickman Engineering, home of the Riptide. Visit them online at blickmanengineering.com.
Brewers, it's time for the beer radio you've been looking for. This is the show that dispels myths, tackles the toughest topics, and makes no apologies for geeking out on beer. Hosted by two guys that drink before they think, Jamil Zainasheff and John Palmer. This is Brew Strong.
Hello, brewers and beer lovers.
Greetings, cretins.
There you are, Palmer. I had to make my own intro for this one.
Yeah, that's a good one.
You know, I gotta be my own man sometimes, John.
Yeah. That's what we're always telling you. You know?
Exactly. I'm finally trying to listen. My name's Justin Crosley. I'm filling in for Jamil Zainasheff today, and I'm here with our friend John Palmer, of course.
Yep.
And joining us in the studio to help us with today's topic are our other friend, Brian Shar.
Hello, gentlemen. How's it going?
Doing very well. And Brian,
Yeah.
I never, is it Master, BJCP, Grandmaster, Super Duper, Excellent? I always forget what's the full title.
I'm an Ultra Master 7 at this, but I'm just a Grandmaster. It's just an ordinary Grandmaster 1. I put on my pants one leg at a time and drink one beer at a time, maybe two.
Right.
Like anyone else.
Just like everybody else. You just happen to know every detail of what you drink when you're putting your pants on.
Sadly, yes.
So Brian's here to help us with today's topic because I would be useless at it, and that is common off flavors found in your beer and the brewing process, right, John?
Yep. We're going to kind of go over some of these, you may consider them basics, but they are, without doubt, off flavors that occur, in beers in every competition we judge.
Right.
And a big part of what we are doing in competition is trying to explain to the brewer, where these, what these off flavors are that we're detecting and where they come from, and so that they can better correct them.
And I like that you point out, that these might sound like or be some of the basics, but not only are they found in competition all the time, as John said, but I find them in professional beer, in craft beer, all too often as well. So just because you think you might have covered these bases or you know about it, I encourage you not to tune out just yet, because some of these things still get through.
Oh, yeah. Brian, and Justin, we kind of refer to these as the usual suspects during competition.
Okay.
Because they are prevalent, and the interesting thing about beers in competition and all flavors in general is that a lot of them develop over time. They can be the result of oxidation or staling processes. So, you may taste the beer at packaging and think, okay, it's great. And then, you deliver it to your customers. Well, a month, 2 months, 3 months down the road, your beer could develop these off flavors, and you may not know it or realize it. So that's where competition, sending your beers out to be judged, can be very beneficial in terms of understanding how your beer is performing in the marketplace.
And especially for, I guess all brewers, but I'm thinking as a home brewer right now, if I've sent some beer into a competition and I know that it's maybe not going to be judged for a week or two or it could be 3 weeks, I don't know. I've still got some of that beer on hand at home. You should taste it the day that you know that beer is being judged, and you'll probably have a better idea of what the judges are tasting then than the day you packaged it, right?
That's a very Good idea. Yeah, yeah. Fill out a score sheet yourself.
Yeah. I mean, obviously you can't fix it by then, but maybe your score sheet will line up with the judges, or if it doesn't, that will be good information for you as well.
Yeah. A lot of our listeners on Dr. Homebrew do that with us if they call in live, and they'll drink their beer with us. And what's fascinating is we've had many people send their beer in, and they're drinking it off their keg, and they bottled a few for us. And they're like, well, I don't get what you're tasting. Well, maybe there was something that happened at packaging. But when you have people that bottled and they keep a bottle for themselves and drink it with us, it is really interesting how many folks will say, oh, yeah, this doesn't taste like it tasted a month ago when I sent it to you.
And that's just an excellent point. You should package whatever you've sent it in for, package it that way yourself. Don't just, because, and we hear this all the time. In fact, I've heard JP do it. I've heard others do it. You start reading your judge's score sheet and you're like, well, that's bullshit. I didn't taste that.
Those bastards, those stupid judges.
Well, yours is off the keg and theirs is in the bottle that you sent.
Right.
So make sure you keep yours around. And, professional breweries, not even at competition. You send beer out to market and put it on the shelf. Put another one in your cold box and taste that in 2 weeks.
Yeah.
So, okay. Well, I want to do a quick thanks to our friend John Blickman over at Blickman Engineering. They do great work over there, and he's just such a strong supporter of this program and the homebrew community at large. They make great things, including their line of Anvil products, which are on the a little more affordable side and designed in partnership with John Palmer here.
That's right. Great products and very durable. Will last you a lifetime. So check them out. AnvilBrewing.com.
There we go. All right. So we're going to discuss these common off flavors, and I guess we should, separate, what happens on the hot side, and then some of these things happen on the cold side, and I'm sure some carry through, and we're going to talk about all that. But, John, you want to just start with the hot side?
Sure. Yeah. Well, hot side, and if in our audience you're not familiar with hot side versus cold side, it's pretty basic. Hot side refers to everything up to the end of the boil, when the wort is chilled, and then you pitch your yeast. So from the time the wort is chilled to and pitched, that's the cold side on out through fermentation. So hot side is things that happen before or during the boil. And I guess one of the first off flavors that you can realize on the hot side is astringency, and this typically comes from the husks from your grain. You can get a very grainy flavor, and that's not necessarily astringency. Astringency is that dry, puckering quality to a beer that you feel it along the sides of your tongue, well, all over your tongue. It's a kind of a coating sensation, and one of the best examples is if you oversteep hot tea, a black tea, drink a very strong cup of tea that has that astringency character to it.
Okay.
What are your thoughts, Brian?
Yeah, that's just nasty. And sometimes, it's easy enough to recreate at home, just like you say, with suck on a tea bag for a little bit, or make some tea that's overly strong. And that's one of those things that's also very pH dependent too, right? Where, without getting too much into the weeds here, the oversparging can be an issue. The high temperature sparging can be an issue with astringency. But then people do decoctions and they boil the grain, and you don't get an astringency issue because it's a process where the pH changes, and you're not just steeping it really hot for a while or sparging it really hot and washing those tannins and things into the wort.
Okay.
But frankly, it's one of those things that. I don't know. I haven't seen that or experienced that in competition for a long time. I think maybe people are getting better at this.
I see.
But John, have you experienced a lot of astringency lately?
Most of the competitions I judge are in Mexico or South America, and you get the occasional astringent beer, say 1 or 2 per competition. It isn't rampant. And usually a comment on astringency is not a show killer for a beer.
Right.
You'll say, yeah, there's some astringency, but the beer can still be scored in the 30s without much trouble. It's
Right.
It's going to be a good beer. It's just you've got some astringency issues. Check your mash, your pH, or it could be, for instance, say too much of a very toasty malt or like a brown malt in a recipe. That can also give some of this kind of astringent flavor without being terribly astringent.
Yeah, it's one of those things that you can mistake it for, if you're not careful, some things like high hop bitterness or certain ingredients or even certain types of wood aging can come across as very astringent, but it's not astringent. Kind of in the way that a Pilsner can have a sweetness to it, but it's not under attenuated.
Right.
It's just their ingredients can be tricky, and you can, if you're not experienced with judging that stuff, sometimes you can pick out astringency when it's really not there.
So I'm glad you say that, because as you guys were describing this, and I kept waiting for more descriptions, because this is one that I struggle with. That to me, there's almost a fine line between a nice dry beer and then this astringency that comes up, and I confuse it sometimes with like an acrid flavor. In other words, if you sat me down, I'd have a hard time telling you this beer is astringent. To me, I might pick up some tannin, or just say it's overly dry. I don't know what. So it's a tricky one for me, even though it's fairly simplistic.
It can be tricky for everyone.
That's a very good point, Justin. I think one key aspect of astringency is it's lingering on the tongue.
Okay. Right. Whereas a dryness, sort of, the beer dries out, it goes away, you're ready for another sip.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. All right. That's helpful. All right. What else on the hot side, John?
Well, DMS, cooked corn aroma, is very common.
Mm-hmm.
That's how would you describe that flavor, Brian?
Yeah, definitely a cooked corn, cooked shrimp.
Shrimp,
it's,
yes.
Sort of a seafood, or like a seafood boil, shrimp shells, something like that. Not pleasant shrimp, like, I'm going to have an appetizer, I'm going to have some dinner right now, but more of that, these shells have been sitting around for a little while after I took them off that shrimp I cooked. It's not pleasant.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. It can also manifest as like a tomato leaf aroma and flavor in dark beers, due to the slightly different malt bill. The aroma changes a little bit from the cooked corn going to more tomato leaf.
Okay.
In my opinion.
And this comes from grains?
This comes from the malt.
Mm-hmm.
It's dimethyl sulfide and dimethyl sulfone. I've forgotten.
That's okay. DMSO.
Yeah, DMSO. Check out How to Brew. I'm sure I talk about it in there.
Right.
And but yeah, it's a chemical that volatilizes during the boil, and so if you're not boiling your wort long enough, you can have high levels of the precursor in the wort that converts to DMS, and you can end up having DMS in the beer.
Is this an issue with all grains, every type of grain that we put in the mash?
Well, it's most prevalent in your low kilned malts, specifically your light colored base malts. So like your Pilsner malt, your American 2-row, and other continental Pilsners that have very low color. Stout malt would be another one. That's where you have more of this precursor left in the grain, and so the wort therefore needs a longer boil, say up to 90 minutes or so, to help volatilize that out and keep DMS out of the beer. Your pale ale malts that have been kilned at a higher temperature have had more of this precursor denatured and volatilized during the malting and kilning process, and so pale ale malts and likewise Vienna and Munich malts have lower levels of these precursors.
Okay.
And lower levels of DMS in the final beer.
But easily corrected with a 60-minute boil?
A longer boil.
A longer boil, okay.
A longer uncovered boil, too. And uncovered doesn't mean you have to keep the lid totally off your kettle. Right? I used to brew outside all the time, and I would brew 10-gallon batches with 20-gallon kettles to make sure I had plenty of headspace. So uncovered, quote, to me meant I would move the lid off to the side an inch or two, so I would still be able to, because outside it might be cold. I mean, it was the peninsula here in the Bay Area. Oh, it might have been 40, 45. It's not like brewing in Minnesota.
Yeah.
But still, from a standpoint of being able to get to a boil, it'd be mostly covered. And I was outside, so I didn't want stuff falling off of trees into my kettle or birds pooping in it or something. Yeah, seagulls.
Sure.
That's not. I guess it would be all sterilized from the boil, but nobody wants poop in their beer.
No.
That's a different kind of off flavor we probably won't talk about today. But all you have to do is move that lid off center by an inch or two, and you'll have plenty. I mean, there's plenty of room for the DMS to go out.
Okay.
The conventional wisdom from years ago, and it was correct, was don't boil with the lid on your kettle. One, it's going to just make a mess, and it's going to be loud and everything else. But B, that's going to prevent enough DMS from blowing off to result in problems.
Okay. So easily fixed.
Easily fixed.
All right. And then, Palmer, in your outline for us, you brought up another one on the hot side that neither Shar or I know anything about.
Good old Strecker aldehydes.
Okay, what are these guys?
Well, during the boil, we talk about Maillard reactions, right? Maillard reactions are these browning reactions, non-enzymatic reactions that occur between an amino acid and a sugar, and they create flavor compounds and color. To a large extent, beer would not be beer without the boil, without the cooking aspect of the boil that creates some of these Maillard reactions and really helps generate some of the malty flavors that we expect from beer. But the flip side of that coin is that while there are other aspects of the browning reaction, the Maillard reactions, called Strecker aldehydes or degradation aldehydes. And what happens is that these amino acids that are in the boil will get oxidized by other compounds and form aldehydes. And so you can get aldehydes such as acetaldehyde or furfural, or there's several that can be formed by amino acid aldehyde degradation. Mercaptans are another, formed from some of the sulfur-containing amino acids. So usually aldehyde formation is not a big problem during the boil, but depending on your malt bill, depending on the thermal load and the intensity of the boil, you can generate some of these off flavors. So just to have that out there, be aware of it. Boil your wort, but don't boil the crap out of it.
Okay, I was just going to ask. So there is a way to prevent this. Just don't go crazy with this thing, with your boil.
Yeah.
Okay.
We talk about a good boil, and Jamil and I have talked about this many times. What is a good rolling boil?
Yeah.
And you want to have activity at the surface. You want to have, bubbles popping at the surface and so on, and seeing that wort churn in the kettle, and get say anywhere from about 10% evaporation on the homebrew scale. Good evaporation rate to get rid of that DMS and so on. But if you do it too much, if your boil is too hard, then you can generate more of these Strecker aldehydes.
Got it.
Yeah, Jamil would always say your wort doesn't need to be leaping out of the pot. And I would literally always think about that in my backyard when I was boiling. Am I boiling? And is it boiling enough? And I said, well, Jamil says it shouldn't be leaping out of the pot.
Yeah,
so that was always in my head.
Mine leapt out of the pot more than I care to admit. So, all right, well, let's take a quick break, and when we come back, and there's a lot more to talk about on the cold side. So we're going to cover that here on Brew Strong. Hang in there, and we'll be back after these words.
Are you looking for a simple brewing system that's great for all grain brewing, but everything on the market seems to be full of compromises? Blickman Engineering has the answer. The Blickman Brew Easy All Grain Brewing System. The Brew Easy is a complete system with easy upgrades and a beautiful compact design, perfect for any size brewing location. At its core, the Brew Easy is built on two gorgeous Blickman Boilermaker brew kettles, a high-temperature March pump, and either a top-tier gas burner or the new Boil Coil electric heater. The Brew Easy adapter lid allows the pots to stack on top of each other, forming an efficient, strong, and compact brewing setup that comes in 5, 10, and 20-gallon batch sizes. Upgrade your Brew Easy system with full automated control by adding a Blickman Tower of Power temp controller, and make moving around easy with the Blickman Kettle Cart. The Brew Easy is modular. If you already own a Boilermaker kettle, you can build your Brew Easy by purchasing just the modules you need. The new Brew Easy all-grain brewing system. See it today at BlickmanEngineering.com and brew with Blickman quality on your new Brew Easy.
Back to the two guys that know how to turn beer into beer. This is Brew Strong.
That's right. Thanks so much for hanging out with us here on Brew Strong. It's me, Justin. We've got Brian Shaw and John Palmer, and we were talking about common off flavors. Before the break, we talked about the hot side, and now, Mr. Palmer, take us through the cold side.
All right. Well, cold side is stuff that happens during fermentation. And, I'm sure, Brian, you'll agree, and Justin, you've talked about this, I'm sure. You can 90% of a beer is the fermentation. You can't have a good beer without a good fermentation. Mm-hmm. So anytime you have fermentation stress, that's where we start getting some off flavors.
Yeah. And of course, this is something that Jamil taught me and that's taught so many brewers over the years. Fermentation.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
So avoiding stress, of course, just quickly is proper pitch rate. Definitely temperature controlled for you home brewers.
Right.
Some simple things. Just go back and listen to the shows. Healthy yeast, proper pitch rate, and temperature control. If we fail at any of these things, I guess we're going to talk about what can happen, Palmer.
Yeah. So yeast growth rate has a lot to do with, I should say, the stress on the yeast has a big effect on their growth rate. And their growth rate therefore has a big effect on the byproducts that they kick off into the wort and beer as they ferment it. Excuse me. So, like a very common off flavor in beer is acetaldehyde. And we typically describe this as being a green apple or sliced pumpkin or latex paint kind of aroma. You're probably familiar with this. I've recently learned or maybe surmised that the green apple character is probably due to a couple of specific esters that get formed in cases where lots of acetaldehyde is being kicked off. And so I think the actual aroma of acetaldehyde is probably more similar to the latex paint. And by this we mean like if you've ever painted your bedroom or something like that, and you walk in and that paint is curing, it has a kind of a chemically smell.
Yeah.
And I think that is the actual base aroma of acetaldehyde. The sliced pumpkin is probably yet another ester that is, coincides with high acetaldehyde production, and the same for the green apple.
Okay.
That's interesting about those being kind of co-esters, because I hadn't read that yet. And I had our friend Nicole Ernie taught me probably January of this year during a Dr. Homebrew where I brought a beer in that was terrible. It had classic homebrew taste. I didn't make a yeast starter. Gosh, imagine that. Oh, I'll just use 2 packs. It'll be fine. It tasted really pumpkin-y. And she's like, that's acetaldehyde. I said, what do you mean? You taste that pumpkin? Like, oh, God damn it. Yes, I taste the pumpkin. I smell the pumpkin. She says, that's acetaldehyde. So another good reason, as you mentioned, for fermentation, pitch enough yeast, pitch healthy yeast, wake it up first, even if if you have any opportunity at all, get that yeast at least awake before you pitch it. But yeah, that's interesting about the pumpkin and the apple, because I've never really gotten the apple out of acetaldehyde, but it makes sense that it's maybe a co-ester that's produced when the acetaldehyde is produced in some circumstances.
Yeah, I've unfortunately had a couple of cidery beers over the years, and one was in a much highly anticipated barley wine that would prove to be undrinkable because of it. But so acetaldehyde can be a big problem, and again, a stressful fermentation will kick off more of it. It is if the yeast are fermenting too fast, and this could be because the temperature is too warm, or if you didn't pitch enough yeast, and there's in other words, there's an overabundance of nutrients for them to work on, their growth rate will increase. They'll end up kicking off more acetaldehyde. Also, if the yeast is old, if it doesn't have enough zinc, and Jamil and I have talked about this on other shows, on Brew Strong shows, yeast need zinc as a cofactor to reduce acetaldehyde to alcohol. So that can be another cause of high acetaldehyde in a beer.
Another one that I don't see too much anymore, but I remember, gosh, it was probably 10 years ago when everybody was racing to get their beer out of primary. Got to get it out of primary. Got to get it off that yeast. Oh, my God, there'll be autolysis. And people were racing to get their beer off of the yeast cake like in 3, 4, 5, 6 days.
Okay.
And that's not usually enough time. Especially not 3 days. Even a week might be okay if you're testing with a hydrometer or refractometer and you know how your beer fermentation is going to go. But, man, people were racking to secondary way too soon. They were sort of killing fermentation halfway. Certainly there's still yeast in that beer, but you take it off of 95% of that healthy yeast, and just bad things would happen. But I don't see and I guess maybe that's not even related to the haze craze, right? People want to keep the yeast around these days if they want a hazy beer.
No, even before that.
Even before then, yeah.
I agree with you. This isn't something that's too common for me anymore.
And that used to be, people would call into the session, Justin, or people would call into one of these shows 10 years back, and that was like a thing. People would call into Brew Strong about, oh my God, why do I have acetaldehyde? And Jamil would say, you don't put it in a secondary or wait longer.
Right.
So don't be too much in a rush to get it off that yeast cake. If you're going to be leaving it in your fermenter for 3 months and it's not temperature controlled, that's too long. But in a normal situation where it might be in your fermenter for 2 or 3 weeks, don't worry about it.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. So from racking too soon, high acetaldehyde, high diacetyl. Diacetyl is another one. Again, diacetyl is created by high growth rate and a lack of nutrients, and so they or conversely an overabundance of nutrients that cause yeast to have to synthesize some particular amino acids, and that creates an intermediary compound called acetohydroxy acid that the yeast kick off into the wort. It's a waste product. That chemical, acetohydroxy acid, has to oxidize into diacetyl before the yeast can take it up, and they will consume diacetyl and clean it up during the maturation phase of fermentation. Again, if you pull the beer out of the fermenter too soon or chill it too soon, you can end up with excess levels of diacetyl in the beer.
Okay. So another one that's fairly easy to fix, but worth pointing out, and this has come up again on the session shows recently with pro brewers, it's also one that can sneak up on you later. So, and there are tests that you can do. So in other words, you might taste your beer in the fermenter and not detect diacetyl. But Palmer, that doesn't mean that it's gone, that the precursor isn't still there. Is that correct?
Right. That's right. You can have the precursor still there, especially if the beer is cold.
Right.
And this is one reason we recommend diacetyl rests, to raise the temperature of the beer. That helps this precursor, the acetohydroxy, to chemically oxidize to diacetyl at warmer temperatures. And once it's converted to diacetyl, then the yeast can consume it. But if you chill too soon, you basically drop the yeast. They don't have time to consume it, or you could still have unconverted acetohydroxy hanging out in the bottle, in the keg, for a couple of weeks until it warms up enough to convert, and then boom, you've got diacetyl in the keg.
Right. And now this is one that is pervasive still today, that we taste in homebrew and we taste in pro brew. And by the way, there's it's not a new phenomenon, but with all the hopping that breweries do now, Hop Creep has introduced diacetyl in your beers. You should go listen to our Hop and Brew School podcast. There's a Hop Creep episode, and we've kind of covered this phenomenon, how it happens. Diacetyl is still a pervasive thing in both homebrew and commercial beer, and some of it is because they're not doing a rest, as if Palmer said, but sometimes it has snuck up on even the most prolific brewers because of what happens during Hop Creep.
Yeah. Yep.
And what's really fascinating about diacetyl to me is this is one of those off flavors that so many people are blind to. Right? Every flavor that you can perceive has kind of a bell curve in terms of the percentage of the population that can perceive it. Diacetyl is kind of a funky bell curve where there's a significant minority of people. I don't know, John, is it maybe 25% that can't even perceive it in any concentration? There's a solid number of a significant minority of 5 or 10% that can perceive it in virtually any concentration.
Right.
And then there's people like me that are right in the middle of the road. And sometimes if it's really tiny, I can't get it. If it's moderate, I get it. So you can have diacetyl and not even realize you've got it.
Yeah.
And what I thought was kind of curious, and John, I'm curious about your thoughts on this. Diacetyl is microwave popcorn butter flavor. Mm-hmm. That's what they put on that stuff you get at the store. Right. So if you buy that and you pop it and you eat it, do you think if people are blind to diacetyl, do they talk themselves into thinking they're tasting butter? I mean, the sense of taste is kind of that malleable.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That's a good question. I wonder if maybe it's oversensitization, desensitization, if you will, to microwave popcorn. Maybe all these people that can't smell it eat tons of microwave popcorn.
And that's really interesting. I never thought about that. But
and in that
there's a
sense,
lot to that.
There might be just plenty that the threshold is so high. It's not that they can't detect it. It's just that the threshold is so high. Like that's a super concentration of diacetyl, right?
That's a good point.
I think it would be a rare person who can't taste that, right? And
that makes sense.
You know what I found recently, that I move along the spectrum that you just described. Sometimes I can detect it very easily. Sometimes I'll be here at my bar, I'll be here at the Hop Grenade, and I'll go, oh, I really like that beer, and I'll hand it to one of my coworkers here, and they'll go, you mean that diacetyl bomb that you're tasting? So my palate really, I don't know why. Sometimes I can pick it up in a second, and other times I go, oh, that's a nice little sweetness to that beer. It's kind of strange.
That is the kind of the interesting thing about diacetyl, is that there is a different thresholds in different styles of beer for it, and then of course you add on that people's sensitivity to it. A little bit in your English bitter or your Czech lager can be perceived as having a nice aspect to the maltiness, and a little extra dimension to that maltiness that is very pleasant. Of course, then you have diacetyl bombs where it's like that's all you can smell. It's never very good in IPAs. But some and darker beers can often benefit from small amounts that would be completely noticeable in another style.
Yeah.
And some people like it. I went to a brewery when we first moved up north with my ex-wife, and we had it shall remain nameless because it's still in business. And it was small, and the brewer kindly took us on a tour and showed us everything, and she would not stop talking for 20 minutes about how buttery the stout was and how much she loved it.
Wow.
And the guy was so nice to us, and I kept trying to find some way of saying, stop talking.
Saying that.
Stop telling him how buttery it is. But there was not ever a good point for me to tell her to stop talking about the butteriness.
This is so cringeworthy.
Oh, God, it was the worst. But some people really like the butteriness. What can I say?
It's true. Oh, gosh, I would have crawled inside my skin.
I tried.
Yeah.
All right, Palmer, what's next?
Let's see. Well, keeping with the theme of fermentation stress, we have esters. Now, most of us regard esters as a good thing. You have very pleasant esters that appear in your ales, in your lagers. They're fermented a little bit colder, and those yeast strains tend to promote less esters in their beer. Well, esters again are one of these fermentation byproducts that the yeast create, and in this case, yeast are taking in different fatty acids, and they're synthesizing different length fatty acids into the wort sterols that we talk about, and lipids that they need for their cell membrane and so on. They're basic nutrients for the yeast cell. Mm-hmm. Well, as they're let's hypothetically, let's say the yeast cell looks out into the wort and says, okay, I want a 10 carbon chain fatty acid, but I only see 12 and 15s. So they'll grab the 12s and 15s, chop off the ends, and now they got their 10. Well, those short chain fatty acids are very toxic to the yeast. And so what they do, and all of you experts out there, please forgive me on the number of carbon chains, but just trying to make an example. These short chain fatty acids are toxic, and the yeast will take that piece and combine it with other alcohols and so on, and create an ester. And they use some enzymes, acetyl transferase and acetyl-CoA enzymes to create these esters. So esters are a way for the yeast to detoxify their environment. And so high growth rates can produce lots of esters because they need to detoxify their environment more. Very low pitching rates can also cause a lot of esters because, again, you have lots of yeast growth as the yeast rush to fill this available area. Mm-hmm. So I guess the bottom line is that stressful fermentations produce more esters. Less stressful or optimum fermentations produce less esters, but produce a spectrum of ester that we find pleasant.
Okay, or desirable esters.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then I sometimes get confused between esters and phenols.
Okay, well, phenols are the kind of spicy flavors by comparison, or aromas by comparison. So esters we generally regard as fruity. Phenols we tend to characterize as more spicy, and they can be like pepper, black pepper, white pepper.
Okay.
The good
cloves.
ones, anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Brian, you were going to say?
Yeah, I was just say that the good phenols smell spicy.
Like good pepper, rather than like green peppers, maybe not, but like black
rather
pepper.
Than like the
like
Band-Aids, smoky, something like that. But yeah, and a good Saison, for example, or a Weiss beer, mm-hmm. Hefeweizen, you want some kind of spiciness.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah, very good point. Yeah. So yeah, your good phenols tend to be spicy. Your bad phenols tend to be plasticky.
Okay.
And you can and smoky is another aspect that can occur. Smoky phenols tend to occur due to autolysis, and as you all were discussing earlier, fortunately, autolysis is not something that we run into as much these days. That's pretty rare. And I guess we can kind of transition to autolysis. Autolysis is, the yeast dying and spilling their guts into the beer. And these flavors can be smoky, meaty, broth. Umami is another flavor that is often ascribed to the autolysis flavors.
Yeah, soy
how do you
sauce,
characterize
tire,
autolysis?
Yeah, okay. Sorry, I stepped on you there, John. No, I think of that like soy sauce, tire rubber
Right,
kind of flavor in a. Not that I've sat down and chewed a tire, but if you've smelled a tire, and you can kind of imagine how it might taste.
Yeah.
So and these are through these happen through fermentation stress. Well, not autolysis, but the excessive phenols would be fermentation stress, and then autolysis is yeast dying.
Yeah, and both can be a source of phenols, excess phenols.
Okay.
And as Brian pointed out, different yeast strains can be phenol positive or phenol negative. Hefeweizen yeast is phenol positive. A lot of your Belgian yeasts are also phenol positive. And this is where we look for these spicy notes in, say, Belgian wit, Saison, Hefeweizen, and so on.
Okay. And you mentioned, plastic as one of these excessive phenols, like kind of that plasticky. And I wanted to bring up, I don't know if anyone knows anything about this, but I have also noticed that through heavily hopped young beers. If the beer, and I don't know if it's like a bottle shock that takes place or it's just like a super fresh, but that plastic phenol can be from hops sometimes as well. Is that your experience?
Yeah,
or
I think that may be a similar smelling but different compound.
Okay.
Might be your isovaleric acid type oxidation compound from the hops.
Okay.
You have we talk about hop polyphenols, and that's the green part, the cone of the hops. And a polyphenol is simply a polymer of phenols. So during the boil or as a result of oxidation, you can have some of these plasticky phenols, I think, being liberated into the beer.
And I guess go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to say this organic chemistry is not my strong point, so I may be a little bit wrong.
And that's kind of, and same with me, that I don't know exactly where to pinpoint this. I guess I really only bring it up to say that when you get into the phenols, it's not as black and white. Sometimes there can be some other stuff going on rather than just a poor fermentation, right?
Right. Yeah. It could be simply an ingredient issue. Oxidized hops being used that contribute more of this character that makes it noticeable.
Sure.
Several possible causes.
Yeah, and
phenols are a very broad class of chemicals as well.
Yeah, and John, I would jump in for a second and say, to me, phenol is that plastic smoky phenol is probably the most consistent off flavor I've encountered in competitions, homebrew competitions, in the last 10, 15 years. Okay. And one source is contamination, wild yeast, and so forth. And I speculate without experimental evidence, because this is it's anecdotal and it's pure speculation, that one reason that is just bad packaging practice. We've all done it. We've all been there. We've all tried to package beer for competition. I had terrible phenol issues packaging, and I would try to clean my bottles in the dishwasher. Don't do that, homebrewers. Just don't do that. I went to the Jamil approach of just buying new bottles for competition. If you're going to compete, just get new bottles.
Yeah.
Right. And it's also I mean, speaking in another Jamil bit of advice from a blast from the way far past, garden hose. Don't use it. Use the potable water RV hose. I used to have phenol, very subtle phenol in all my beer. And I was using a garden hose, and Jamil told me, well, do you drink out of that hose?
Yeah.
Well, no, it tastes nasty. Well, do you think your beer is not going to taste nasty if you use that nasty old hose?
Right.
Says, go get the white RV hose. So I think it's a little stuff like that persists. I think that maybe not a lot of people are using that nasty old garden hose.
Yeah.
But I think that maybe unclean or not perfectly clean and not perfectly sanitized old bottles are maybe a cause why this is such a persistent issue in competition.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep. Very good point. Glad you brought that up.
All right. And do we want to talk about fusels before we move on too?
Sure. Yeah. Fusel alcohols or higher alcohols, those are part and parcel with fermentation. I mean, the yeast take in, nutrients, and they kick out ethanol as a primary waste product, but they also kick out other alcohols, and due to the composition of the wort. And when those alcohols pass a certain threshold, then they become noticeable, and we'll often describe a beer as being hot or slightly solventy. And that is these fusel oils or alcohols that are manifesting in the beer. And again, you can prevent these with, good fermentation practice, a stressful fermentation, high temperatures, low oxidation, over-oxidation. Anytime you get on the wrong side of or get away to the sides of the bell curve in terms of the process, you're going to have a chance of producing more of these byproducts.
Yeah, fusel to me is that classic homebrew fermentation where you're not temp controlled, and not even where you're brewing at 95 degrees or fermenting at 95 degrees in your garage in summertime. It's more of an issue of, hey, you have a lot of yeast, you've pitched properly, you're putting your beer or your wort in a 70-degree hall closet. Well, without any temp control, that yeast is going to chew through primary fermentation in like 18 to 24 hours, but it's going to have an excursion, and the bigger the original gravity is, you're going to have an excursion up to 80, 90 degrees. And for most styles of beer, that is not good. It doesn't lead to anything good for all the reasons you've discussed earlier here, John. But the fusels to me are always like the hallmark of, oh God, this beer was not temperature controlled in the slightest, not even in terms of putting it in the basement.
Right.
It was just left out in a corner someplace because, hey, people have small living spaces and they do what they can do.
Yeah.
But that's the hallmark of high temp fermentation.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
That's right.
Well, why don't we take a break here, and when we come back, we're going to discuss sulfur and some aldehyde stuff, and of course, we got to talk about oxidation. A common problem that people find. So, hang in there. You're listening to the Brew Strong, and we'll be right back.
Back to your hosts, Jamil Zainasheff and John Palmer. Putting the testicles in technical. This is Brew Strong.
Well, I'm Justin filling in for Jamil, but I'm doing my best to keep it technical with Palmer here.
You're doing very well. Very well.
Thank you, sir. Well, why don't we talk about sulfur, sulfides, these things?
Yeah, sulfur is a common problem in competition. I get a lot of beers where you get this vegetal cooked cabbage, onion kind of flavor. Brian, you get that pretty often too?
Not that much, believe it or not. Maybe that's a difference between Bay Area water and LA water.
Okay.
Related to that,
well,
or I don't know. I'd be curious about your thoughts on that, because I don't generally get a huge amount of sulfur in the Bay Area comps that I judge.
Okay, yeah, it seems to be fairly common in the competitions I go to. And I've been very curious about it, so I've been looking into it. Sulfites and sulfides are generated by the yeast during fermentation. They will take sulfate from the water, SO4, and use it as an oxidizer in creating different amino acids that they need during the lag phase. And as a result, they'll kick off sulfide and sulfites which are SO3 and SO2. Sulfides are just S, no oxygens. And depending on your yeast strain and so on, you'll have different levels of these compounds produced. Some lager yeast strains are very well known for producing rotten egg odors, the hydrogen sulfide. And as the beer ages, you can have again breakdown or oxidation of different aldehydes and amino acids with these sulfur compounds that can create these aromatics. And so some of them, a couple of the common ones are like methanol and methanethiol. And methanethiol is also known as methyl mercaptan. And you've probably heard talk about mercaptans in sensory, Brian. That kind of sewer drain kind of smell.
That's what you want in your beverage. Sewer drain.
Yeah. So that sewer drain or rotten cabbage kind of smell, that's due to the methanethiol or methyl mercaptan, as it's also known. So that's a very common sulfur character that can get into beer. And again, its origin seems to be partly from the malt, partly from the yeast strain, and and the kinds of amino acids that yeast strain needs to grow, as well as oxidation in the package, where chemically these different compounds will chemically oxidize over time to produce these mercaptans.
So preventing this is to try to package as cleanly as possible.
Right. Low oxygen packaging. I mean, and especially for commercial brewers. I mean, so many brewers are canning these days. You've really, as a commercial brewer, you've got to bite the bullet and get a packaged DO oxygen meter or total package oxygen tester, because as if your beer sits warm on the shelf, oxidation will happen, and it produces these different staling flavors.
And as a home brewer, you might want to pick up yourself a Blickman beer gun. To reduce the amount of oxygen when you're bottling for competitions and such. Nobody's going to get zero oxygen. So, John, am I correct in assuming that over time, some of these things are just unavoidable? That's why there's a point where beer has a shelf life?
Yeah, there's a bunch of compounds that are very common in aged beer, as the beer sits on the shelf, and that's that methyl mercaptan. There's another one called phenylacetaldehyde, which is a honey-like aroma, and I get that one in lagers very often. Everybody's familiar with that papery smell, trans-2-nonanol. That's another aldehyde that's common in oxidized pale lagers. Dimethyl trisulfide is another pretty common one, and that one has an oniony character. And I think I often pick that up in IPAs, where it's can be coming from aged hops as well as aged malt, generating dimethyl trisulfide.
Or straight up Summit hops. Sorry,
Yeah,
Summit to me always has a garlic and onion taste. That's meant to be slightly comedic, but that's also maybe a thing to think about, right? Your hops can have, depending on when they're harvested and what condition they're in, when you brew with them, they can lend an oniony flavor to your IPAs or hoppy beers.
So,
That's right.
So maybe if you're troubleshooting and you haven't really had issues with this onion before, and now you try a new hop and you're noticing it, it might be that before it could be some of this oxidation.
It could be. That's right. How Simcoe can be cat pee if it's harvested at the wrong time. Remember, that was an issue that people discussed, 5-6 years ago when Simcoe got big.
Right.
That, oh my God, this is great beer, but then this one's cat piss.
Right.
Well, it depends if you harvest too. I forget if it was too early or too late. That you would have more of a cat pee character. But if you harvested at the proper time, it was phenomenal.
Okay. Yeah. But if you're tasting onion in your beer, no matter what hop you're using, you might have some oxidation problems.
Yes.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay.
Oxidation does happen to every beer. The best commercial packaging they can do is to get down to, say, 5 parts per billion of oxygen in the package. And that level will, give you a pretty good shelf life, 3 to 6 months, without heavy stale flavors like this.
Okay.
But, if you're not using Blickman beer gun at the home level or purging your bottles or kegs, it's very easy to get, a small amount of oxygen, say 1 ppm, but 1 ppm can definitely cause these oxidized flavors.
Okay.
And especially as you go higher to 5 or 7 ppm, like if let's say you take your beer and then you add some water to dilute it, at post fermentation. Normal tap water can have, 5, 7, even 10 parts per billion of oxygen, parts per million. And that will readily oxidize the beer.
Okay. Good to know. And some of these flavors, just to point out, these are we're covering the off flavors here. But in your aged barley wines and other things, there are some desirable ones. A little bit of raisin and sherry in moderate amounts, right? A little toffee, even molasses, stuff like that. Those, of course, can go in a supreme direction where that now it's not good anymore. But a nice aged barley wine will have some of these oxidized characteristics, right?
Yeah, we call that complexity.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, and in moderation, it's some complexity in moderation before it turns into rotten cabbage or all of a sudden
sewer drain. Yes.
Yeah.
John, before we get too far away from the sulfur, I had a question for you, or just a thought, because for many years, I would use the Camden tablets, the potassium metabisulfite, to treat my water to get rid of the chloramines, right? Because most of us in the U.S. now have chloramine rather than chlorine water purification in the municipal water system. And the chlorine will kind of blow off overnight. The chloramines won't. So you put in, for 10, 15 gallons of water, I'd add half a Camden tablet. And I looked into a while back. I was curious about the chemistry of this, and I couldn't track down a lot of it. But as far as I could tell, because I had a friend that was allergic to sulfites, and just would make her aware, okay, there's maybe a little bit in here, and she never had any problems. But I wanted to look at that first. And most of what little research I did indicated that the potassium metabisulfite would react with the chlorine and then just volatilize and get out of the liquid. But I wonder if maybe if you're maybe using too much, like you're putting in a whole Camden tablet for 5 gallons, when that should be enough to treat probably 10 times that much water. I wonder, do you think that causes potentially sulfur or sulfur-related off flavors?
It could, but generally I think I recommend 1 Camden tablet for 20 gallons.
Okay.
So, and at 4 parts per million of chloramine that you're neutralizing with it, you're going to generate about 10 ppm of sulfate and chloride. So very small concentrations end up. Now, let's say you added, 1 Canon tablet per 5 gallons, as you said, so 4 times as much. Well, you could have, say, 15 or 20 ppm of metabisulfite in solution going into beer. I think the yeast would probably take care of that.
Okay.
Or what the yeast activity would probably overwhelm that concentration. That's a great question, though. That'd be worth looking up in some of the journal archives and seeing what the threshold for sulfites are in beer. But yeah, I think you are correct, though, that even though metabisulfite is an antioxidant, it would, when we talk about Maillard reaction products, the melanoidins also being antioxidants. In packaging, these antioxidants that have done some antioxidant work up front can later break down and put flavor compounds back into the beer over time. So I think too much metabisulfite could definitely have negative consequences in that regard.
There you go.
Interesting. Yeah, I knew that you would know like 10 times more about that chemistry than I did.
I try to read.
John knows 10 times more about everything than anybody.
I went to that Derek Zoolander Institute for kids who can't read good.
Yeah. All right, gentlemen. Well, that covers our Common Off Flavors program for today. Well done, John Palmer.
Oh, thank you.
Brian Sharp, thanks for joining us on today's show and helping out.
Oh, thanks for having me. It was a blast.
Yeah, I really
Do we have time for like Justin's medical corner first?
We do not. You can find more Brian Shar over on the Dr. Homebrew podcast right here on the Brewing Network. Just search Dr. Homebrew where they evaluate your beer. If you want to send your beer in for that show, just send it to drhomebrew@thebrewingnetwork.com. Send an email, and they'll get you lined up. You can send show questions and topic ideas to this show at brewstrong@thebrewingnetwork.com. And Palmer reads all of those emails, so it's a great way to get your ideas here on the show. So, well done, Mr. Palmer. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Brew strong, everyone.
Brew strong.
Brew strong.